It's the first meeting of its kind since 1949. China's president will meet his Taiwanese counterpart this weekend, setting aside more than 60 years of division. So will this summit lead to better relations between China and Taiwan? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. The leaders of China and Taiwan have announced they'll hold talks in Singapore this Saturday, the first such meeting between the two rivals in 66 years. Taiwan split from mainland China in 1949 following the Communist Revolution, which forced Chinese nationalists to retreat across the Taiwan Strait. Relations have been tense ever since, with the Chinese government threatening military force if Taiwan ever tried to gain full independence. The US gave up formal relations with Taiwan when it formally recognised Beijing. That was in 1979, but has stayed committed to protecting the island. Now, although this will be the first talks between the leaders of China and Taiwan, there have been occasional lower-level engagements since 1993. And relations noticeably improved after Taiwan's President Ma Ying-jeou took office in 2008. Well, the news agencies in both Taiwan and in China have been trying to play down expectations for the meeting. Taiwan's presidential spokesman says no breakthrough is expected from these talks.
Xi and Ma will exchange views on issues such as promoting peace across the straits and maintaining the status quo across the straits. There will be no deal signed and no joint announcement after the meeting. President Ma will return to Taiwan on the same day.
All right, time to bring in our guests then. In Beijing, we have Ina Tangen, who's political analyst on China and economic affairs commentator. In London, we have Jonathan Femby, China director at research service Trusted Sources. Jonathan is author of 16 books, 8 of which are about China. And joining us on Skype from Taipei, Michael Cole, specialist on relations between China and Taiwan. Michael is also the Director of International Affairs at Thinking Taiwan Foundation. Welcome to you all. Can I start with you then, Michael? And clearly this is a meeting that is hugely symbolic, but how should we read the symbolism and how can we discern then what China's intentions are towards Taiwan?
Well, it is certainly symbolic because, as you mentioned in your introduction, this will be the first time that the two leaders of Taiwan and China will be meeting for talks. What makes this meeting particularly interesting and symbolic is mostly the fact that it will occur 2 months, even less than 2 months prior to the January 16 presidential and legislative elections in Taiwan, in which Ma Ying-jeou's ruling party, the Kuomintang, is expected to fare rather poorly. So the value of that particular meeting lies much more in the symbolism that comes from it than the actual substance of the meeting. As presidential office spokesperson said today, there will be no agreements and there will not be a joint press conference afterwards.
All right, Ina in Beijing, what does China want out of this?
Well, I think, first off, you have to put this into perspective. I mean, we tend to see this within the crucible of the relationships between these two countries, but not countries, I mean, between these two entities, pardon me. But what you should be really doing is looking at the entire economic picture. When you start seeing that Taiwan has had some sudden downturns, both manufacturing, service sector, unemployment, these things have not pointed down sharply just recently. And as a result of that, there's going to be a lot of pressure to figure out what the next step is. And this is obviously a question between greens and blues.
And Jonathan, in London, will the meeting then, we've just heard, haven't we, that the ruling party and the president's only in post for another couple of months. The ruling party and its prospects for re-election look fairly gloomy. Will this affect the election then, which is due to take place at the end of January? Will this help the ruling party or hinder it?
I don't think it'll help the Kuomintang in any measurable degree, and it could indeed act against the Kuomintang, because all the evidence in Taiwan, as we've moved towards the election, is that Ma's policy of drawing closer to mainland China is unpopular. And some of the agreements that he's reached with Beijing have not been able to get through the legislature. There have been demonstrations, and the feeling that Taiwan was being sucked into the orbit of mainland China certainly, I think, doesn't go down well on the island. So if there's any hint in this that actually what we're seeing here is Xi Jinping trying to assert authority over Taiwan at this meeting with Ma, that could be a very bad sign for the Kuomintang. And in fact, as Michael said, with the Kuomintang lagging quite seriously in the polls, and they've done nothing to help themselves, I must say, in recent months electorally. In a sense, Xi is speaking to the wrong person. He should be talking to the leader of the opposition, the leader of the DPP, Tsai, and trying to work out the relationship with her if, as expected, the DPP wins. But of course, for Beijing, the DPP is not a partner they want to talk to at the moment.
And so, Michael, having said all of that, why is President Xi pursuing this at this particular moment? And how delicate a balancing act will it be for him to send the right messages and not to appear too overbearing, if you like, on affairs in Taiwan?
Well, absolutely. My sense is that, and we can only speculate for the time being, my sense is that President Xi is hoping that by giving President Ma the sort of visibility that he will be obtaining in Singapore on Saturday, they might be able to make the China issue much more of an issue in the presidential campaign in Taiwan, where ironically China has certainly not been one of the main issues for, especially for the DPP, that has focused primarily on domestic issues, and this seems to be reflective of what the population in Taiwan is looking for. Now, the KMT currently probably only has one major advantage over its opponent in the DPP, and that is cross-strait relations, because the perception out there is that the KMT is better equipped to deal with Beijing and to ensure stability. So this is not necessarily the reality. It does not necessarily mean that the DPP and Beijing would not act pragmatically if the DPP were elected. But for the time being, it seems that Beijing, preferring to deal with the KMT, will try to give it a bit of a boost by making China and cross-strait relations a larger issue in the elections.
All right, but that's a very interesting point. Ina, in Beijing, how should we be viewing this particular moment then in cross-strait relations with regard to the broader Chinese ambitions in the region? It's got several disputes going, territorial disputes going, as we know, in the South China Sea. What does this mean for China and what it wants more broadly in the region?
Well, you have to remember that Taiwan is aligned with China, mainland China, in terms of the issues that are involved in the South China Seas. They maintain the sovereignty of China in there, Taiwan and mainland. So what you have here is that's not really the issue. The issue is really about the broader economic things, and what your guest was just talking about. You know, the rhetoric and the reality don't match. I mean, right now there's a strong emotional feeling that for this pro-independence, you've seen it in these demonstrations. But the reality is that Taiwan has to choose where it's going to go. Is it going to go with Japan? Can Japan support them? With a flagging U.S. economy, Europe in the dumps, China is still growing at 6.5%. It's the largest area of investment and dependency for Taiwan. And I think there's some growing pains with that. But in the end, in the long term, it's going to be very difficult to see Taiwan pursuing the kind of policies or ideas that the DPP has voiced in the past. This kind of idea that they're going to resurrect Taiwan as a completely independent country just doesn't hold water over the long run.
And so, Jonathan, it sounds very much as though Taiwan is in need, certainly economically, but yet the vast majority, it would appear, of people on the islands are devoted to the notion of independence and would rather go without than even contemplate reunification with mainland China.
Indeed, I mean, recent polls show very low support for reunification. You use the word independence more, let us say, Taiwan's separate identity, which is what has been a dominant theme in Taiwanese politics now for 20 years or more. The difficulty for Taiwan, as one Taiwanese politician once put it, we don't mind being an offshore island, but we'd rather be an offshore island of California than of mainland China. And Taiwan is in this geographical position where it is, and under Ma has pushed that further, under which it is linked with the mainland, and its trade, as we were just hearing, has been falling off. Its exports have been falling off. Its exports to the mainland have been falling off, and I think it's fair to say that there is a widespread feeling on the island that the policy of getting closer economically to the mainland, which Ma has pursued, has not really paid off for most of the Taiwanese people. And so everything is up in the air, but the real question, I think, is if, as expected, the DPP wins the presidential election and does well in the legislative elections too, whether the pro-independence, pro-autonomy wing of the DPP will start to agitate for, let us say, a referendum on autonomy, and whether that will then set off a counter-reaction from Xi. I mean, we have to remember that China, in the other small territory beside it, Hong Kong, a smaller territory, has adopted a much more assertive position towards Hong Kong over the last 18 months or so. And might it do the same thing in Taiwan, and what would be the effect of that? I think these are the kind of issues which we need to be looking for next year.
Michael, in Taipei, under President Ma, relations have warmed somewhat with mainland China. Can you tell us how this has been manifested? What sort of areas have we seen closer relations between the two?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen a fairly substantial amount of liberalization across the Taiwan Strait that, to be very honest, was long overdue. It was necessary. If Taiwan wants to be treated like a normal sovereign country, it needs to have normal relations as much as possible with the international community, and that includes China. We've seen tremendous explosion in cross-strait tourism, for example. Last year, more than 4 million Chinese visited Taiwan. Exchanges in education, crime fighting, investment, banking, movie industry. It's been quite substantial. And to a point undermined, Joe, my view is that the majority of Taiwanese were relatively comfortable with that process, which explains why President Ma was able, using a very similar platform, to get reelected in 2012 as well. The difficulties that they encountered starting early last year with the services trade agreements, that sparked 21-day occupation of Taiwan's parliament, was when government-to-government negotiations threatened to cross certain lines that Taiwanese society were not willing to allow authorities to cross. And those lines, in their view, were threatening Taiwan's way of life, its sovereignty, its democratic institutions. And so by that point, we had arrived at basically the limit of the rapprochement that was possible given the current political situation on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Now, it also needs to be said that Tsai Ing-wen of the DPP has committed to maintaining the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. She has clearly stated that she would not pursue independence for Taiwan, And the people around her are also in favor of maintaining the status quo, which is the view and the preference of the majority of Taiwanese.
Because Ina, in Beijing, it has to be remembered, doesn't it, that if there is a DPP victory in the next elections, and they are a pro-independence party, although having committed, as we've heard, to maintaining the status quo, we have to remember that China stands poised, doesn't it, with military action should Taiwan get a little bit above itself, as Beijing would see it, and decide to go the extra mile and push towards trying to form a fully independent state.
Well, absolutely. You know, what you have here, I mean, this is not something new. I mean, the whole issue of the legislation that was passed that said that military action would be on the table if Taiwan tried to succeed. You know, we can talk a lot about that, but let's look at the countervailing realities, and that is there's only 21 countries in the world that even recognize Taiwan. It lost its seat in the UN. Now, there's an emotional response to that, much as happened in Hong Kong. But the idea that the mainland was cracking down on Hong Kong is ridiculous. There was very, very little action. The action that did happen was local Hong Kong policemen. They were handling themselves. There was no armed PLA troops involved. So, you know, it's the problem with the world today is that people are getting carried away with their emotions. Yes, I understand that the Taiwanese have a very strong sense of their own identity, and that will continue. But they need to come to terms with China simply because of the economics. As China expands its very, very ambitious One Road, One Belt initiative, and as the international of the yuan goes forward, the question is, where can Taiwan go? If it says that it hasn't benefited from the relationship with China, that's ridiculous. It has. I mean, you know, the past growth, if it had been linked to anywhere else, would have just been plummeting downwards. So the question is, how does Taiwan come to terms emotionally and intellectually with the fact that it's a new century? China's going to be an important player. They are not an island off the coast of California. They are part of, they're off the coast of China, and China considers it part of one country. So it's a question of wrapping your head around that. If their policies do not continue, they do not get favorable treatment from China, it's going to be a very rough and rocky road over the next period when the DPP is. So I think Xi and China are looking to the long term. They want to show that there's an open door, but they're not willing to you know, go backwards in terms of the current relationship.
And Jonathan, looking on with a great deal of interest, one imagines, is Washington, of course. Washington having dedicated itself to protecting Taiwan, should there be any military altercation. What do you think Washington, the Obama administration, is making of this particular moment?
Well, I think the United States has always really wanted the cross-strait situation not to produce a problem, and above all, not to produce a problem where it has to take a stance. If you remember, in 1996, the PLA staged war games in the Taiwan Strait, and Bill Clinton sent American aircraft carrier group in, and the Chinese backed down on that. Well, America doesn't want to have to do that again, and it's interesting that at the big military parade in Beijing at the beginning of September, there was specific mention of China having developed missiles which could sink an aircraft carrier, which was a fairly obvious a message to the United States. So really, Washington wants cross-straits relations to be as quiet, as tranquil, as amicable as possible, while at the same time offering support for Taiwan as a democratic state. So I think, you know, America will be watching this and hoping that Xi and Ma do get on, that there aren't any hostile reactions in Taiwan itself, which could complicate relations. That's really I think the American position.
Okay, Michael, Ina's suggested that basically it's a new century and Taiwan basically has to get its head around the new reality, not the new reality, actually, the continuing reality, and that it isn't an island off the coast of California. What do you think the vast majority of Taiwanese are going to make of this particular moment in terms of its pivot? Are they going to suggest or give the backing to a political party that will foster closer relations, certainly more stable relations, or will they prefer to cause ructions, if you like, and go for a more confrontational approach with mainland China?
Well, nobody wants confrontation. I mean, it's certainly not good for business. It's not good for China, and it's certainly not good for Taiwan. What most Taiwanese are looking for is continuation, it's stability, it's predictability. And as I stated earlier, I mean, the great majority of Taiwan, the Taiwanese recognize that China next door is the world's second largest economy, and that their economy, for better or worse, is very, very much reliant on the Chinese economy. Taipei could certainly do a lot better in diversifying its economy, something that we haven't seen in recent years because, for all intents and purposes, the KMT government focused on one country alone, that was China. But economic determinism can only go so far, and this is certainly something that China is hoping to achieve as well, is to convince Taiwanese using economic means that their future lies with China. Unfortunately, while this might appear to be the rational way to look at things, identity and nationalism and patriotism do not work like that. So it's very, very difficult to convince even people who tend to vote for KMT. They put a premium on their way of life, on Taiwan's democracy, which stands in stark contrast with the current reality in China that in many ways is becoming increasingly authoritarian and repressive. So this is a very, very hard sell for Taiwanese right now, notwithstanding the economic relationship.
Jonathan, can we get back to Saturday's meeting and the delicacy surrounding it? It's being held in a neutral location, Singapore. They are to refer to one another as Mr., not President. What else do they have to maintain in order to keep the equilibrium so that this doesn't offend either party?
Well, I think they have to agree to disagree to some extent without making the disagreements too evident there. I mean, there are things that she could intimate or suggest which would ease things, such as, for instance, making it easier for Taiwan to enter international organizations where the People's Republic has often blocked its progress, making it easier for Taiwan to find, if you like, an international space. But she cannot retreat in any way on Beijing's insistence that Taiwan is still part of China, is a renegade province which should come back into the Chinese system. And as Michael was just saying a moment ago, that, of course, is an anathema to most people in Taiwan who have what's called a Taiwan identity and who can express that through the ballot box by voting in a competitive election for their president. And that and many other things they don't want to lose. And to go back to Hong Kong, despite what was just being said a few moments ago, I think the impact of China's reminding the Hong Kong people in the white paper of last year that Hong Kong was part of China and that China, the authorities in Beijing, had the last word over what went on in Hong Kong was, in a sense, pretty negative for Ma in the Taiwanese context.
All right. Ina, in Beijing, what would constitute success from the Chinese perspective of this meeting?
Well, I think it's, for them, it's giving face to somebody that they've been able to deal with and showing that the door is open. Yes, I agree with a previous commentator about this issue of both sides agreeing to disagree. I'm not saying that there's going to be a reunification. I'm just simply saying that there has to be a productive way in which Taiwan can interface with the mainland. And you know, we're looking at this all from the emotional side, but let's look at what Taiwan has to offer China. China is in the midst of trying to transform its economy and avoid the middle income trap. To do that, it needs to develop a service, a consumption economy, develop innovation, in technology. These are all things that Taiwan has.
I'm going to have to jump in,
so
I'm
it's
afraid.
Not just
We are running out of time. In fact, we have run out of time. Ina, terribly sorry. Thank you very much. That was an interesting point. So hopefully we can have another programme about this subject in the near future. But Ina Tangen, Jonathan Femby and Michael Cole, thank you all very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching. Remember, you can leave your comments on the programme page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. Thank you for watching from me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team. It's bye for now.